מתחת לשולחן. רואים אותך, שומעים אותך.
Good morning, everyone. Do you hear?
Okay. Now you can see it.
Good morning, everyone.
הם לא יכולים לפתוח את המיקרופונים, אבל הם יכולים רק לעשות שלום.
You're welcome to come here. We're outside having a picnic, a picnic cheer outside on the grass. So come.
Okay. Boker Tov. Wonderful to see everyone. Hello, Yael in New Zealand. Boker Tov.
Oh, Yael's here?
Yael is here. Yes.
Hi, Yael. Hello.
And welcome Helen from Ramat Gan and everyone who's joining us from far on Zoom. If you're here in Ra'anana and you'd like to come and join us in person, we're trying today to learn outside to make it more comfortable. So we won't have to be wearing masechot, and we have here a wonderful group of women who are joining us here outside as well in the shade, right? So we're going to try. Boker Tov lekulam. First day back at school. Wonderful to see everyone. I hope those of you on Zoom have the source sheets. And please feel free to, I don't know if it works as usual, that you can unmute yourself and ask questions. I'm assuming. Have patience with us. We're figuring this out. I need to ask Tzipi how to do that. Okay. Is it 9?
1 minute.
Okay. I need to ask her for the technology. Okay. People still getting in? See? Okay. CP?
What's wrong?
No, if people want to unmute and speak, okay, can they? או לא? לא, אני שואלת אם הן יכולות לדבר או לא.
רוצה אני אעשה להם. את לא תשמעי, אבל אני מפחדת שלא תשמעי. אפשר לעשות ניסיון. את עושה את זה כאן, אני לא רואה. סקיוריטי? אני פשוט לא רואה מה זווית הזאת. Security, תפתחי את הסקיוריטי. Unmute themselves. Okay, עכשיו אתם יכולות לפתוח. You can open the microphone.
Can you open your microphone? Just make a test. Yael,
yes, hi.
Wonderful. Okay, terrific. Thank you. That's wonderful. All right. Boker Tov lekulam. Boker Tov to those who are here. Wonderful to be back.
How do you like your coffee? I'm bringing Gina anyway.
Very excited to be back. Wonderful. We're starting a new course called the 48 Ways. The introduction that I'm going to give today is just to get a sense of what it is we're going to be doing this year. On the one hand, studying Pirkei Avot is like going back to meet an old friend. It's something that I love very much. But we're doing it this year from a different angle, from a different point of view, from a different perspective. We're not going to be studying Pirkei Avot, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, Mishnah Aleph, Mishnah Bet. We're going to be studying one specific Mishnah, which is entitled the 48 Ways. And we're going to be, hopefully, going through the 48 ways this year. And the idea, of course, is going to be a focus on self-improvement. This is what Pirkei Avot is. It's a little bit different from what anything I've done in the past, obviously using Jewish sources to help us to do it. Just today is a short introduction as to what we're going to be looking at. So what is Pirkei Avot? Pirkei Avot is often translated as chapters of the fathers or ethics of the fathers. What it is actually a compilation of ethical teachings from the Chachamim. About 60 different rabbis are mentioned in Pirkei Avot. What's the most interesting about Pirkei Avot is that it stretches for about 500 years, from Shimon HaTzadik, 200 BCE, until Yehuda Nasi, 200 CE, spanning approximately 500 years, different rabbis speaking different times. And Pirkei Avot does not necessarily go chronologically. It begins in that way because we have the Zugot, And so we have Shmaya v'Avtalyon, Hillel v'Shammai, etc., but not necessarily. Pirkei Avot is part of the Mishnah. When I say Mishnah, I mean oral law, the oral tradition, which originally was given over orally, passed from a teacher to student, parents to children orally, and then Rabbi Yehuda Nasi wrote it down. Where does the Masechet of Avot appear? It appears in the order of Nezikin. That's its place. Now, we know from the Echad Miyodea, right, on the Leil HaSeder, Shi, Isha, Sidrei Mishnah, right? That's what we sing, right? What is Shi, Isha, Sidrei Mishnah? Okay, we remember the order. We have a mnemonic device, Zman Nakat, Zra'im, Moed, Nashim, Nezikin, Nakat, Kedoshim, Teorot. That's the order of the Shisha Sidrei Mishnah. There are two nunim. And I always say to my students, how do you remember what comes first, Nashim or Nezikin? You remember because you always know ladies first. That's how you remember that Seder Nashim comes before Seder Nezikin. Masechet Avot finds its place in Seder Nezikin. What is the Mishnah about? It's very strange. It's different from all the other Mishnayot. It doesn't have any halacha in it, and it doesn't have a Gemara that speaks about the Mishnah. It is about ethical behavior, moral teachings, how we should direct our lives. What I find so special about Pirkei Avot is I find that when you begin to study, you recognize there isn't, what's the expression in English? Different strokes for different folks. It doesn't mean that there is only one way. It's about finding your way. These are wonderful life suggestions. And each person has to kind of, how do we say, lenavet, has to find and navigate their derech. And that's why it's so interesting that it's called, right, Pirkei Avot. The concept of Avot, actually, there's a controversy. What does the word Avot mean? Avot here means our rabbis, our Avot, our patriarchs or our leaders who set the tone. The other explanation, which I think actually makes a great deal of sense, is we find halachically with the laws of Shabbat that there are avot melacha, right? That there are categories of work, and from them we learn. So perhaps the reason it's called Pirkei Avot is because these are the building blocks, or this is the foundation of, and then each person has to kind of take those building blocks and find their own way. One might be surprised to find Pirkei Avot dafka in Seder Nezikin. Why? Because Seder Nezikin deals with civil damages. Why would a Mishnaic order that deals with theft, assault, I wrote here, oxen gone wild, because there's so many examples of a shol that nafal lebo, shol shegonech, shol this. My nephew was studying for a test in Mishnah, and he said to his mother, "What do I care about the ox?" He was crying. He's like, honestly, I couldn't care less about the ox, right? So she said, anytime it says ox in the Mishnah, substitute it the word bicycle. Oh, now, so she was trying to explain to him, right, that an ox was indeed a means of transportation in the times of the Mishnah, right? Bicycle. So what is the point of putting Pirkei Avot in Seder Nezikin? Well, the idea is, of course, that Seder Nezikin has to do with my behavior between me and my fellow man. What are damages? Damages is when I haven't been careful, right? If I went over my property line, if I didn't take care of my animal, right? If I was not cognizant of my issues with my neighbors, right? Then I get into a process of having to pay damages. So here in Seder Nezikin, we are concerned about ben adam lechavero. In Pirkei Avot, it's connected. It's about my behavior between me and my fellow man, but also between me and myself. It's about self-improvement as well. How can I be a better person so that my ben adam lechavero, my behavior with my fellow man is improved. And by doing so, also my kesher with HaKadosh Baruch Hu is improved as well. We often make a distinction, right? I can be a good person. That's what's important, being a good person. Of course, that's true. But being a good person is also connected, right, to being an Oved Hashem, to being a person who serves God in the very best way. The two are intrinsically connected. Just a minute about structure, because that's important for our shiur. There are 5 chapters in Pirkei Avot. The first 4 follow a certain very well-known structure. And we're familiar with it because we've studied it before. And the structure usually is that a rabbi is introduced, and then the words, Hu haya omer, he used to say. And then whatever statement he used to say, right? Thank you. This is the way the 4 chapters of Pirkei Avot, first 4 chapters are set up. Now, we know that when the Mishnah says, Hu haya omer, it wasn't the only thing he used to say. We understand that, right? But if I would just take ask you to raise your hands, and I would ask you to remember your father or your mother and something that they always used to say. I bet everyone could remember something that he or she used to say, right? We understand that when the Mishnah says, Hu haya omer, it was something that was repeated because they felt strongly about it, or it was a message that they wanted to give over, or a teaching, not just take a sweater, right? Even though that's something I find myself saying all the time. I hope I'm not remembered just for take a sweater, but there has to be something more than that. But the idea of Hu haya omer means this was his life statement. This was, I think, mantra. This is what he used to repeat. And this is what was important for him to teach. And each one of the Rabbanim are introduced with the Hu haya omer. Chapter 5 is different. Chapter 5 doesn't have any rabbis, Hu haya omer. It has numbers. And it works through the numbers 10, 7, and 4. Each one describing the significance or importance of those numbers. And then we come to chapter 6. Chapter 6 is what we're going to be studying this year. The chapter has its own name. It's called Kinyan Torah. It actually comes from Masechet Kala, and it's a wine or tractate, and it was placed here. Now, it's called Kinyan Torah because the entire chapter talks about how a person comes to acquire Torah. The word kinyan doesn't mean that I buy Torah, right? Like liknot, but rather I acquire. How do I come to acquire Torah? And that's the entire chapter deals with the issue of how does the person come to acquire Torah. Here comes the wonderful part of the Jewish ingenuity or the Jewish cup. It became customary from the times of the Vilna Gaon, 10th century, to study Pirkei Avot between Pesach and Shavuot. Why? There's a famous statement, and that is Derech Eretz Kadma LaTorah, right? First what? First be a mensch. First be a mensch. Then study Torah, right? Those things we go hand in hand. And in preparation for Chag HaShavuot, Chag Matan Torah, it made sense to study Pirkei Avot, Derech Eretz, what? Kadma LaTorah. This is how we will prepare between Pesach and Shavuot for the receiving of the Torah. What's the problem? We know from the Torah and from Sfirat HaOmer that we count Sheva Shabbatot Temimot, we count 7 weeks between, right, Pesach and Shavuot, which means that there are 6 Shabbatot between Pesach and Shavuot. Except that Pirkei Avot only has 5 chapters. Oh no, what are we going to do? Ask the rabbis. What are we going to do? We will bring a 6th chapter. That's why I say this is the Jewish head, right? What are we going to do? We're going to bring a 6th chapter. And this 6th chapter, which originally found its place in Masechet Kala, then became part of Pirkei Avot. And this is chapter 6. That's what we're going to be studying this year. Chapter 6, Kinyan Torah. I find it, again, very creative on the part of the rabbis, right? What will we do? We'll make sure that the last Shabbat leading up to Chag HaShavuot has tochen, right? Has meaning. And so that's what we'll study, Kinyan Torah. The other interesting custom which developed was for people to study Pirkei Avot between Pesach and Rosh Hashanah. Now, it's an interesting custom. Why? I think it happened simply because Shabbat afternoon was very long. I'm being very practical. I think that's what happened. I think Shabbat afternoon was very long between Pesach, right, and Rosh Hashanah, it's the summer months. What do we do Shabbat afternoon? We'll learn something which is engaging and easy for people, Pirkei Avot. It seems that there was another reason why Dafka Pirkei Avot was chosen for the summer months, and that is because people go on vacation. And what happens when people go on vacation? Sherry says, right? If we're far from home, we can what? Kind of relax, right? What we do, because even though, what if we found Eretz Yisrael is a very small country? You're always going to bump into someone that you know. Not only that, in Chutz La'aretz, you're also going to bump into someone that you know. But the idea was, let's teach Pirkei Avot during the summer months to keep people what? On the straight and narrow, right? To make sure that people don't, right? The truth is, we see it probably most with the teenagers, that as soon as they're not in a misgeret, in a structure, what? They sleep all day, they're up all night, right? The behavior kind of, when you're in a structure. So the teaching of Pirkei Avot during this time made sense. As I said, the 5th and 6th chapter are different. And the other thing is, it made sense to teach Perek Kinyan Torah also as we got close to Rosh Hashanah, not just Chag HaShavuot, in idea of scholarship, which is interesting because here we find ourselves exactly at this time period, right? The Chagim have passed, and hopefully one of the New Year's resolutions, we can call it, that people have made is what? I'm getting back to learning, right? This is something I want, right? It's one of our New Year's resolutions. So we'll study, right, Kinyan Torah to give us a kind of, right, direction and framework as to how we can possess Torah. Rabbi Professor David Galinkin from the Schechter Institute in Jerusalem said something very interesting. Based on the book, Everything I Needed to Know, I learned in kindergarten. If you don't have this book, it's worth buying. It's a wonderful book. It came out in 1986, written by Robert Fulham, a Unitarian minister. And in this book, he writes that every important lesson that we really need in life, we learned when we were small in kindergarten. And not only that, the lessons that we learned serve us all through life. And he brings a lot of examples. I just brought a few. He says, for example, share everything, play fair, don't hit people, put things back where you found them, clean up your mess, right? These are all lessons that we learned in kindergarten, and they serve us our whole life. And then he goes on. I mean, some of the examples are wonderful, like take a nap, when you cross the street, hold hands. Like these are just, everyone should take a nap, right? Share milk and cookies. Like these are things we all learned in kindergarten, but they're wonderful in terms of life lessons. But what he did is he said, everything I really needed to know about Judaism, I learned in Pirkei Avot. And he wrote a wonderful, similar kind of list as Robert Fulham did, about things which he took out of Pirkei Avot, which he sees as life lessons. And he says, same way he created everything I need to know I learned in kindergarten. He said, everything I really needed to know about Judaism, I learned from Pirkei Avot, about being kind and listening and sharing, and all of these things. And he says, before anyone else thought of it, our Chachamim already had, right, the basis for how to be a good person. And he actually said, it's just a very interesting side note, he decided to take upon himself to learn Pirkei Avot by heart. He said it took him 2.5 months. Every time he was on a bus or on an airplane or walking, he put in, and he decided to learn it by heart. And he said, I decided to do it for 2 reasons. 2.5 months is not bad, actually. I was very impressed. 2.5 months. First of all, my children learned the first Mishnayot of Pirkei Avot in song, right, in the Dati school system. And because they learned it in song, they remember it until today. That's obvious, right? It's not difficult to learn by heart. Also, the Hebrew is it's not complicated. It's simple Hebrew. It's not very complicated. They're very short stanzas. Way before Sesame Street understood that people needed like 30 seconds, right? Pirkei Avot understood Hu Haya Omer, and there's 3 things. That's it. Everyone can remember 3 things. And so it's very, very easy, actually, to learn. But he also said that as a rabbi, it came in handy to know Pirkei Avot by heart, because if you're ever asked to give a drasha, you can always, right? You can always rely on Pirkei Avot to be, right, to be meaningful and to be something that you connect to. What's interesting is that Pirkei Avot has been studied and memorized for over 1,800 years. And besides the Tanakh and the Sidur and Haggadah, there are more printed copies or more commentaries on Pirkei Avot than any other Jewish book. What I would say is also fascinating about Pirkei Avot is that there are still contemporary commentary constantly. Because Pirkei Avot is so relevant to our everyday life, there are contemporary commentaries. There are also on the Chumash, but even more on Pirkei Avot. And I'll just give you an example. Rabbi Twersky, psychiatrist, just passed away this past year from COVID, has a beautiful commentary on Pirkei Avot, in which many of his stories of dealing with patients and addiction, he connects to the Mishnayot in Pirkei Avot. Rav Yisrael Meir Lau, when he was on sabbatical between being the chief rabbi and being again appointed the rabbi of Tel Aviv, wrote a commentary on Pirkei Avot. So many, again, contemporary people, again, filling it with stories of the people that he's met, etc. People have written contemporary commentaries on Pirkei Avot. I think we too, as we learn it, we essentially write our own commentary, right? Which are the things or the messages that speak to us. Now I want to introduce to us the Mishnah that we'll be working on this year. Don't be frightened by the enormity of the text. We're going to break it down bit by bit. This is the introduction to our Mishnah. Gdolat Torah yoter min hakeuna umin hamalchut. Greater is Torah than the priesthood and royalty. Shamalchut nikned b'shloshim ma'alot, because royalty is acquired by 30 stages. V'hakeuna b'24, and priesthood by 24. V'hatorah nikned b'40 u'shmone dvarim, and Torah is acquired by 48 things. What is the opening of our Mishnah? It's a comparison. First of all, Torah is greater. Torah is greater than what two things? Melucha and kehuna, right? Kingship and priesthood. Now, these are two things that we greatly admire. We admire the king and we admire Kohanim. And yet, the opening of the Mishnah is that Torah is greater. A person who has acquired Torah is greater than a king and greater than what? A Kohen. We'll have to understand why. Mishnah goes on to explain, because Malchut nikned b'30 ma'alot, because royalty is acquired by 38 stages, Kehuna by 24, but Torah by 48. And therefore, the more, I guess, character traits or the more stages it takes to acquire something, we understand that it's greater, because it's more difficult perhaps, or right, more special because you have made the effort to acquire it. Now we take a look at the things and we'll see, right? And these are the things we're going to be working on this year, Bezrat Hashem. B'talmud, by intelligence. Shmiat ha'ozen, right? By listening, right? I'm not going to read through the entire list, but you'll just get a sense. By awe, by fear, by humility, by joy, by attending to the sages, by clear thinking, by a minimum of sleep, by a minimum of chatter, by faith, right? By making a fence around our words, by not taking credit for ourselves, by loving God, by being upright, bears the burden together with their colleagues, judges with scales weighted in his favor, who listens to others and adds to his knowledge, who learns in order to teach, who makes his teacher wiser. It goes on and on and on. There is a list of 48 things, right? Which is quite incredible. What my plan is this year, Bezrat Hashem, is to, right, go through these character traits each week. Hopefully we'll break them down. And the idea is that we will not only learn them in order to acquire Torah, but hopefully we'll learn them for ourselves in order to impact our life as well. the question that the issue that the Mishnah opens with is interesting because we're making a comparison between Torah, Malchut, and Kehuna. It's not the only time. There's another Mishnah which talks about a keter, which talks about wearing a crown. And it says, right, that there is a keter Malchut and there is a keter Kehuna, the keter and a keter Torah. These three ktarim are crowns that people wear. In that Mishnah, actually, keter Torah, right, is considered a great thing. Why? Because keter Malchut and keter Kehuna can only be worn by certain people. We know that that's true. But keter Torah can literally be worn by everyone, right? That's very special. And of course, there's an allusion to the fact that when the Jewish people received the Torah, everyone, the children in the Gan Yeladim, always before Chag HaShavuot, come home with a keter. And on the keter, it says, Na'aseh v'nishma, right? That the angels put on the Jewish people a keter Torah. Keter Torah is for everyone. That Mishnah ends with a beautiful statement, Beketer Shem Tov ole al gabehem. But the crown of a good name, that is the highest crown of all. Why? That's a crown that you make for yourself and no one can take it away from you. But it also teaches us how careful we have to be with regard to someone's reputation. So if you've taken away someone's Shem Tov, it's very hard to bring it back. And a keter Shem Tov, really, I mean, when we think of someone who's passed away, what does the person take with them? Their Shem Tov. That's what they leave behind, right? Their good name. So the Mishnah lists 48 skills or qualities that are necessary in order to acquire Torah. And this list is commonly referred to as the 48 ways. And that's how I entitled our course for this year. The 48 Ways actually is a beautiful book. First, it was a series of lectures. And then it was actually a book put together by the Talmidim of Rabbi Noach Weinberg, the founder of Yeshivat Eshet Torah. What Rabbi Noach Weinberg did is fascinating. First of all, this is the 1960s and 70s. It's the beginning, or the very beginning, I would say, of the Kiruv movement, right? Of Chazara B'Tshuva, tremendous interest. College students are flocking to Eretz Israel. They're confused. They're looking, they're searching. This is before people started going to India, right? People used to come to Eretz Israel. And he found the yeshivat Eshet Torah. And one of the courses that he began to give was this, the 48 Ways, based on this Mishnah. But his chidush, or his idea was that instead of just learning these 48 ways, right, as ways to acquire Torah, these are 48 ways to improve ourselves. These are life lessons. That was the chidush of Rav Noach Weinberg. And what he did in his course was, he didn't just teach each one of these midot or traits or characteristics. He actually, and in his book, it's very fascinating, at the end of every chapter, he actually gives homework, right? He actually gives mesimot that a person should stop and think and do, and how can you implement this into your daily life? He wanted it to be almost like a course in which people work on their midot. I will mention, I'm going back to the fact that it's traditional to learn Pirkei Avot between Pesach and Shavuot. I once found myself in the Bet HaKnesset exactly during this time period between Pesach and Shavuot for Mincha, and that's the time in which Pirkei Avot was usually studied. There was suddenly a lull between the tefillah and the end of the tefillah. Little Pirkei Avot booklets were handed out, and then there is a great mumbling in the shul. And I turned to someone and I said, what are they doing? And she says to me, they're saying Pirkei Avot. And I said, oh, my understanding was that Pirkei Avot should be learned, not that Pirkei Avot should be read. There is a difference, right? When we say Derech Eretz Kadma LaTorah, when we say that this is a time period for the study of Pirkei Avot, it means, what am I gaining by what? By reading the Mishnayot, and say, okay, check, V, done, chapter 1, read. No, the idea is, even if I would just take 1 or 2 Mishnayot and I would study them properly, and I would implement what I have studied into my behavior, this is what was meant by the study of Pirkei Avot during this time. Hopefully, that's my goal or my aim this year, right? in that we will learn, and then hopefully we'll take home. We'll have something to take home with us. Don't worry, I'm not giving you homework. Anyone who wants to do homework, that's up to them, but you won't have homework from me. Now, first we have to go to the introduction, and we have to ask, why is Torah superior to kingship and priesthood? First of all, the list of qualities, right, as we saw in the opening of the Mishnah, the numbers are what? Are 30 and 24. I did not bring the list. If anyone is interested, I'm happy to bring the list. But for the sake of our Mishnah, it's not relevant. Our Mishnah wants to focus on the character traits that a person needs to acquire Torah. Those are for them, not for us, right? If you want to know, okay, I'm happy to bring them, right? But in terms of what our Mishnah is focusing on, it's focusing on the ways to acquire Torah. But there's a big distinction between the qualities of an individual who is a king and a Kohen versus someone who is Koneh Torah, a person who is acquiring Torah. And what are the main differences? First of all, among that list of characteristics or traits of a melech is, for example, the king may recruit citizens for public or personal service. He may confiscate land for his own use. It's very interesting because in Sefer Shmuel, when the Jewish people request a king, Shmuel Hanavi is trying to convince them that they don't realize what it entails to have a king. And he teaches them Mishpat HaMelech, how complicated it will be. And he says, the king can take what he wants. This is the law of the king, right? Still, the people insist that they want a melech. But some of these qualities are based on genealogical considerations. For example, Melech Israel has to be a Jew and not a slave and not a bastard or a convert. And some of these qualities are so that his position of power will not corrupt him. For example, he's not allowed to accumulate unnecessary riches, not have too many, horses, wives, gold, silver. And he must write a Sefer Torah, and he must carry the Sefer Torah wherever he goes. This is part of the list of the 30 things of the qualities of a king. But what do we find? Most of these qualities are, in a sense, slightly removed, right? They are more connected to his position, right? To the concept of the fact that the people need to respect the king more than anything else. For the most part, the qualities of a king are not merit-based. Now, it doesn't mean that the king should not be meritorious, right? It doesn't mean that. Surely we want Melech Israel to be a person, right, of fine caliber. But most of these things are not connected to his, right, to his behavior. There are things that he should do or he should not do. What the Torah is concerned with is the king's honor, as well as the honor of the country. Those are the qualities which are defined for a melech, for a king. It's interesting, again, as I mentioned, this Shmuel HaNavi, he comes to Shaul, who was the first king of Israel. And when Shaul did not do as he was instructed, he didn't kill the king of the Amalekites, right? And Shaul blames it on the people, right? Shmuel HaNavi says to him, you can be small in your eyes, but you are Rosh Shiftei Israel. You cannot be small when you represent the 12 tribes of Israel. There is something about kvod, right? The honor of the people, which makes you, requires you to stand up. You can be humble. You can be humble when you're talking about yourself. You cannot be humble when you are Melech Israel. You have to recognize that you represent the people. The second category is kehuna. This is a little bit different from malchut. Why? Because, there's the famous joke about the person who comes to the rabbi and he says, right, I want to offer a donation to the temple, right, $1,000. I want to be a Kohen. So the rabbi says, I don't understand. Why do you want to be a Kohen? So he says, well, my grandfather was a Kohen. My father was a Kohen. I also want to be a Kohen, right? We understand what this person didn't, that kehuna is something that is passed from father to son. ideally, a person who is a Kohen understands that with kehuna comes responsibility, right? Come zchuyot v'chovot, right? I have responsibilities and I have also obligations, right? But we don't do a test, right? For anyone who's a Kohen. Let's see, right? Have you done this today? Have you done this today? It's something which is what? Passed on from father to son. We hope, indeed, that a person would understand, right? That also with being a Kohen comes the idea that you are a role model. I think that's a good way to put it, right? For others in the greater community. I remember once, my husband is a Levi, and once we were in the Bet Knesset and someone came and he was an Oleh Hadash from South America. And he came over to my husband at the washing station and he said, I know I'm a Kohen, but I don't know how to do Chanan. And my husband said that it hurt him deeply because it's something that your father teaches you. And if you know you're a Kohen, but you don't know how to do Birkat Kohanim, it means that something was lost in the transition and then the passing on from one generation to the next. My husband said, you need a Kohen to teach you. That's the truth, right? You could honestly go to the internet. Surely everything is on the internet today. But the idea that someone should instruct you, right? Someone should instruct you in it, right? And indeed, in the following weeks, he learned, and then he himself got up to do Birkat Kohanim. It was very beautiful to know that he had taken it upon himself, that he wanted to learn. But this is indeed something which is passed on through tradition. And that's important. So priesthood is different. It's a status which is inherited from Aaron HaKohen. And the qualities listed are actually interesting. When the Torah speaks about the Kohanim, there is more emphasis on what they should wear, how they should groom themselves, how they should appear, right? It's very much about the physicality and the to be presentable, right, in front of the community, rather than whether or not that person is saintly or scholarly. We don't ask the Kohanim, right? Have you studied? Have you this? Have you that? We recognize that this is a kind of, right, of inherited status. And we hope that people understand, right, that they carry that with some sense of duty and obligation. But again, we don't, right, demand from our Kohanim to necessarily be scholarly people. Now, in truth, in ancient Israel, the Levim and the Kohanim were teachers, right, of the Jewish people. That was their second role. When they weren't serving in the Bet HaMikdash, they served as teachers to the people, right? So that is a natural role of the Kohanim and the Levim, but it doesn't necessarily have to be anything which is character-based. That then brings us to Torah. Torah is different from Kehuna, and different from Malchut. And what is the difference? The difference is, it is not a birthright. It's not an inheritance. It does not enhance necessarily the social standing of its bearer, meaning you don't get any special kavod, right, for being a Torah scholar, chaval, but that's the truth. It used to be that people used to say, oh, my son is a rabbi. Oh. Nowadays, people are embarrassed to say my son is a rabbi, right? The study of Torah doesn't necessarily open doors and give people kavod. Perhaps it used to be. I love the fact that the South Africans give tremendous kavod. At every simcha I've ever been, the South Africans will say, right, welcome to all the guests and to the rabbis. I think it's so beautiful. It's lost. It's completely lost in most general society. But the idea that we do give kavod, we give kavod to people that are lomdei Torah, but it's not necessarily the case. But what is so special about Kinyan Torah is that it is available to everyone. Now, if Osher would step out, she would surely say, that's not the case for women, right? Not always was Keter Torah available to women. She's right, I have to say, she's right. Now we are living in wondrous times in that, truthfully, a woman who wants to study Torah is accessible to everyone. That was not necessarily true in previous generations, right? So we really, right, are living in wonderful and important times. The truth is that in terms of Kinyan Torah, just as Kehuna is inherited, so Torah is not. And it works both ways. It means that if my parents were great Torah scholars, it doesn't necessarily mean that I will be a great Torah scholar. This is not something which is passed on, genetically to the next generation. Some people wish it was so, but it's not. It means that everyone has to work for Torah by themselves. Now, of course, it's a benefit if a person grows up in a home in which they heard Torah, right? That's a benefit. It's an added benefit, but it doesn't mean everyone has to acquire Torah themselves. It doesn't matter who your father or your mother was. It doesn't ensure that you are automatically going to be a Torah scholar. But it works the other way as well, which means that even if my parents were not Torah scholars, doesn't mean that I can't be a Torah scholar. Meaning we can't use it as an excuse saying what? Well, I don't come from a learned background, or I never learned, right? Or I didn't have a Torah education. No, Torah is for everyone to acquire, and we're not allowed, in a sense, to make excuses either way, right? I have it, right, in my genes, or I didn't have it. What's actually so special about the women that I meet constantly is that many of them, whether it was in England or in South Africa, didn't have the Jewish day school experience. It simply wasn't available when they were growing up. And now they're catching up, right? Which is absolutely outstanding. It's wanting tremendously, right? Especially because they feel that their children know so much, right? That they want to learn. They want to learn Torah. No one else can earn the crown of Torah for you, yet neither is it denied from anyone who is willing to commit to it. Now, what's interesting again is that we have examples of all of this. Of course, Rabbi Akiva, who was one of the greatest scholars in the Mishnah, was unlearned until the age of 40. Now, what's interesting about this is that I was always under the impression that Rabbi Akiva started to learn Torah at the age of 40. And I went and looked it up. It's not. Rabbi Akiva was illiterate. He had never learned, forget about Torah, he'd never learned until the age of 40. And so literally he came to learn Aleph Bet, right, at the age of 40. Well, what a tremendous role model that is for all of us, right? And therefore, at any age, I could come and learn. And I would even say people who come to the study of Torah at an older age are more motivated, right? They want to learn. That's one of the reasons why I love adult education. Everyone who's here is here because they want to learn. And that's already, right, a tremendous bonus. The other example is Shmaya and Avtalion that are mentioned in Pirkei Avot were descended from converts. And Hillel, as a young man, was very poor. He didn't have social standing. He didn't have money. The famous story that's told about Hillel going up to the roof in order to hear the shiur of Shmaya and Avtalion, the reason he went up to the roof is because he didn't have money to pay that morning, right, to the shomer in the Bet HaMidrash. It also teaches us that Hillel is tremendously in his halachic psak, he's tremendously sensitive to the needs of the poor because he came from that. He understands. The Gemara in Masechet Yoma says, the crown of priesthood, Aaron merited to take it, and the crown of kingship, David merited to take it. The crown of Torah is still in its place. Whoever wants to take it, let him come and take it. That's why, Kinyan Torah 48 ways, Torah is greater than priesthood and Torah is greater than kingship, because the crown of Torah is for anyone who wants to take it. בשלושה כתרים נכתרו ישראל, כתר תורה וכתר כהונה וכתר מלכות. כתר כהונה זכה בו אהרון, כתר מלכות זכה בו דוד, כתר תורה הרי מונח ועומד ומוכן לכל ישראל. Why am I reading it in Hebrew? Because the words are so beautiful. The כתר תורה is מונח ועומד מוכן לכל ישראל. מוכן means what? It's ready, it's there. All you need to do is what? To take it, right? שנאמר, תורה ציווה לנו משה, מורשה קהילת יעקב, right? It's an inheritance for all of us. Now, it's interesting because that verse could actually be argued. We just said, but Torah is not an inheritance. Everyone needs to learn it themselves. So what is it? Is it a morasha or is it not? right? It's an interesting debate. We just said Torah is for everyone. Morasha Keilat Yaakov, it's our inheritance. Now we just said no, but just because your parents were Torah scholars doesn't mean, right, that you are a Torah scholar. What does the word morasha actually mean? Well, a person can leave you an inheritance, but what? It could also just sit there, right? Here comes the words, right? Munach umuchan, right? It's your inheritance. It's yours. But what? You have to take it. You have to make use of it, right? If you leave it in the what's it called? In the safe, right? Then it doesn't have any effect. You have to actually come and use it. I was thinking of my father this morning, who was a statistician. He would have asked, why not 50? And it's an excellent question. I don't have an answer. It's an excellent question because when we have numbers in Judaism, there has to be significance to the numbers, always, right? Anytime we have numbers in Judaism, there is significance. 48, what's 48, right? What's 48, right? If there's going to be a number, then what? It should be 50. 50 is complete, right? 50, right? I don't know. I don't have an answer. 48 is a very good question. Yes, Tammy. Please. Yes, excellent. Yes, Thank you. Boker Tov. Ken. I'll just repeat for the people on Zoom. Tammy made two wonderful observations. One, if it was 50, people might think, oh, Chazal chose a round number. And they just threw out 50. 48 is very clear that each one of these is important and significant, but also they are hard work. Even though it's mukhan, don't think that it's easy, right? Pop it in the microwave. When you think of ochel mukhan, what does that mean, right? Pop it in the microwave. No, it's hard work. It's hard work. Thank you. The first of the 48 ways is study. Okay. Now, it seems almost absurd or obvious. How else is a person going to acquire Torah unless they study, right? In Hebrew, the word is betalmud, right? The truth is sometimes the most obvious needs to be said. Don't you learn that, especially with children? What do you think that everyone should know needs to be said? Needs to be said. If anyone thinks you can acquire Torah without study, you are wrong. No such thing. There is no such thing as acquiring Torah without studying Torah. And we have to understand that the word study, right, means that a person needs to commit themselves to acquiring Torah. Although practically the entire remainder of our Mishnah will teach us that intellectual achievement alone hardly produces a Torah scholar, if it's not accompanied with spirituality, humility, personal growth, it all starts with the words study. Rabbi Twersky writes, to say that study is essential for the acquisition of Torah appears superfluous. We would hardly think that to acquire Torah by some magical means. The word study then means diligence, perseverance. And then he adds a very, very modern twist, which I think it's important for us to hear. And that is, especially today, when modern technology has impacted on us, there are many things that in the past required much labor and effort, and now are done with relative ease and much greater speed. Acquisition of Torah has remained unchanged. In order to acquire Torah, what do you have to do? You have to work hard, you have to study, right? I think that the example of what modern technology has done for us is brilliant. Why? Because I find my kids saying, my phone is so slow, right? Or the computer doesn't work fast enough, right? And I need to say to them, you don't understand, right? We've become so accustomed that things work so fast, right? Indeed, just my refrigerator broke down, Motzei Yom Kippur. Of course, I didn't know because I hadn't opened the refrigerator for all of Yom Kippur. But then when I came after the fast and opened the refrigerator, everything was defrosted. Okay. So I spoke to my mother that night and I said, where am I going to get a technai to come on Motzei Yom Kippur? What did my mother say? I remember they used to deliver ice. This is what my mother said to me. And I'm laughing because I'm in my tzara, which is what? I need to find a technai to come and fix the refrigerator. My mother puts everything in perspective. Again, this is just one generation. It's my mom, right? She says, I remember when they used to deliver ice. Okay. So again, remember Gina, right? Where this is a modern technology problem, right? The idea that so many things we do are quick is a reminder that Torah requires study. It requires study. But the truth is, and again, I'm going back to Rabbi Noach Weinberg, it's not just Torah. Anything worthwhile requires hard work. That's the truth. It's very hard to teach that. I'm finding it difficult to teach it to young people today. It's very hard. Why? Because we live in a disposable society where things are made and then thrown away. Remember in the days where we used to fix things, right? We used to buy something that was made with craftsmanship, that there was a certain sense of what? Pride in the job well done, and something that was made, right? Well, something that was made to last, right? Right? I've actually been to a shoe store where the woman said to me, right? You're only going to wear it for what? For one season anyway, what's the matter? And I'm like, people used to buy shoes that would last for what? For years, right? And so this is number one. Number one is study. You should know that anything worthwhile requires hard work. And Torah is one of them. If you want, right, to acquire Torah, you have to put in work. At the beginning of Sefer Yoshua, God instructs Yoshua, Ve'agita bo yomam v'layla. You should meditate, or you should be involved in Torah day and night. And what's interesting with regard to Torah versus other types of mitzvot is that other types of mitzvot are specific, right, for a certain day or time or place, while Torah is supposed to be something in which we are involved in what? Yomam v'layla, day and night. It actually is the structure of our lives. And it seems to be defined as a kind of permanent mitzvah. There's no time or place or limit on how much we study. Torah study is not time-bound. And studying Torah is a constant and endless search for God with no sense of day or night. I think that V'agita bo yomam v'layla doesn't mean that we are supposed to be engaged in Torah all of the time. It means that Torah is part of our daily life in such a way that it actually guides us through the day and through the night. Constantly, it's our guide. And if a person thinks that if my predecessors were Torah scholars, I don't need to study, the answer is that every person and every generation has to study Torah for themselves. The Mishnah actually says, prepare yourself for the study of Torah because it does not come to you through an inheritance. When we said it is your inheritance, but we said every person has to work for it themselves. Now, some of the interesting commentators, the Meiri, the Maharal on Pirkei Avot say that the fact that the Mishnah uses the word bet Talmud and not lemidah, for example, bet Talmud is directing us that a person should learn from a teacher. That when you learn from a teacher, it literally makes Torah come alive. And it doesn't mean that a person can't learn Torah on their own. Surely they can. But there's difference from learning Torah from the words on a page than in a place where we are engaged in Torah. And I think that's one of the things that we missed, right, during Corona, which was that we could engage with our fellow learners, right, our chavrutot, our fellow learners, because when a person learns in that way, Torah learning becomes, right, alive. Rav Lau makes a comment here, and he says it's very important that a person is always referred to as a Talmid Chacham. Why? Talmid. Talmid means you recognize that you're always learning, right? And that's beautiful. It means, I know some people say I'm a perpetual student, but that's the truth, that when it comes to Torah, right, we're always learning. There's always something new. Again, it's reminiscent to the fact that we completed the Torah and then we begin again, right? The idea is there is always something new to learn, that's for sure. And every time we come to these Parshiot Shavua again and again, there's always a new insight or something that I didn't pick up on, right, before. And also, we are not the same as we were last year. So each time, right, it's new to us, right? There's a beautiful story about a girl who's in the women's gallery, and the parsha that's being read is the story of Yosef and his brothers. And Yaakov sends Yosef to his brothers, right, to see where they are. And she screams out from the gallery, Yosef, don't go. She knows what's going to happen, right? The idea is, of course, right, spoiler, we know the stories. We know them, we're familiar with them. We come to them year to year, from year to year. But each time there's something new that we learn. There's a story of one of the great giants of Torah who was asked how he reached his status as a gadol. And he said, it wasn't that I was so clever. It's just that all the other students in the class found chavrutot. And when they found chavrutot, they started to argue. What shall we learn? Should we learn this? Should we learn this? Should we learn in depth or should we learn for his spec? He said, I just started to learn. I didn't spend a lot of time, talking about it. I just did it, right? Again, that's a really important concept in terms of study. I know lots of people who talk about learning. The idea is choose something and learn, right? Just, like Nike, just do it, right? Just do it. As I said, Rabbi Noah Weinberg in his book says, this doesn't only apply to Torah, it is a lesson for life. I just found this beautiful story. Rav Moshe Feinstein's grandchildren once visited him and found him studying, and they didn't want to disturb him, so they were waiting patiently at the door of his study. And the Rebbitzin walked by, and she said, if you're waiting for him to take a break from his learning, you'll be standing here all day. What she said was actually that they should what? She didn't say to them, go home. No, he wanted to see his grandchildren. What she said was what? Go into the study. Go into the study. If you think, right, that a person becomes a gadol hador by not studying Torah, it's because they're constantly studying Torah, right, that they become great. So Rabbi Noah Weinberg speaks about Talmud in the concept of repetition and review. This is definitely true with regard to Torah, but it's most definitely true with regard to everything in our life. And he says, study the same subject for a long period of time. Don't bounce around superficially from one topic to the next. Choose a topic you love and become an expert in at least one aspect of life. It's actually a beautiful idea, right? If you love something, learn it. The sense that I should be learning something else. I often think, I really should be learning this. But if there's something that touches you, that speaks to your soul, that you love, learn it, right? Let Torah be a positive experience. Be engrossed. Whatever subject you choose, there's always more to learn. Even as you move to other areas of knowledge, be alert to picking up information that's pertinent to previous topics. And this allows you, right, to cross-reference and to have a deeper understanding. Many of you have been studying with me for many years, and you know that one of my pet peeves, one of the things I hate is when I come with a presentation of a certain topic and people say, oh no, we learned that before. I hate when people say, I learned that before. I hate it because every time you learn something, there is something new, right? Every single time. And actually, I've learned that before is actually wonderful. Good that you learned it before. Now you're going to learn it differently again, right? With a new, right, topic and insult. Think about the teachers in the primary school. How many times have they taught Chumash Bereshit, right? Probably hundreds of times. And yet there will always be one child or one comment, right? Which will be new, and that's true. And the other thing is, when you learn, don't forget to make it part of you. And he says, what happens oftentimes is that we learn something, we enjoy it, we have an insight, and then it slips out of our mind the next day. When he wrote that, I said, oh, I don't feel so bad, right? It happens to everyone, right? the insight is fleeting if we don't capture it in a certain way. So it has to sink into your bones and permeate your mind. How do you do this? First of all, by review, and that's important. And second is that verbal repetition is very powerful, right? And now we know that that's true. If you want to remember something, then what? Say it out loud, repeat it, right? This is a very, very good trick. That's why we repeat the Shema twice a day. That's why we review the Torah year after year. The sages of the Talmud will repeat any new insight 40 times and repeat an especially vital idea 101 times. The 101 is fascinating, right? Because similar to what Tammy said, if you say, I repeated it 100 times, I got that down pat, 100. No, 101, right? Just to be sure, 101. And so it's true of Torah study, but it's also true, as Rabbi Noach Weinberg says, of anything in life. If we want something to stay with us, first of all, we need to learn it. We need to invest time and energy, right? We need to make it a part of us. We need to review and repeat, right? And I would add, it will be by Himshech, but we'll see that one of the other qualities is that we don't just learn it, but we share it, right? When we are able to teach or share, then Torah truly becomes part of who and what we are. So this was our introduction today on the 48 ways. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on Zoom. Pleasure to see everyone this morning. Thank you to the ladies who came in person. Got a little bit of a suntan this morning. Yishar koach. Shavua tov lekulam. Thank you.
Thank you, Gina. Thank you. Thank you.
How are you? Yeah,
excellent. Oh, correct. You should say hello from it. It's nice to meet you. And then, right, find a way of repeating the name. Correct.
I love so much the things you said. There's so many parallels. Piano teaching, learning piano, teaching piano. All the same thing.
To repeat, to
I say, questions, whatever it is.
Yes, whatever it is.
Say it out loud, sing the notes. See your next one. And then it becomes
yours. Beautiful.
And also, I noticed that I was told that about Khan cannot matter just anyone. Or a Talmud Chacham, anyone who is or a man of place standing in the community.
Interesting. Yes. Sorry, let me just ask the women who are here today. Please be honest about the situation of sitting outside. Tell me how you feel. Yes, no. Should we move inside? It was comfortable. It was not. Right. Okay. It would be better. Okay.
Yeah, it was a bit sunny.
We could move this way. We have to move over this way.
Yeah. No, it's inside, I'm sure.
The shiur for Yael is inside. You can reconnect on the new link. Thank you, everyone. Yom Tov.
I don't have the link.
Oh, I'll send it again when I get home.
Can I take some Melanie?
Take one, please. I'm so glad you're here. So nice. No.
What new link?
Like 924 was even good for me.
It's nice to see just to come out. And, yeah, thank you.
Okay, I'll see you.
Yeah, Kira's in that group. How exciting.
And I'm so upset we're not going to be there because we don't do Shana and please go to Shana. It's just going to be good. So let's see. Anyway, otherwise we'll see.
Bezrat Hashem. So good to see you, Chazan. How are you?
Good to be here. I'm sorry I was late. I have grandchildren.
Hello, good morning. Good to see you.
I am. Thank you, Gina.
For what? Yael?
Yeah.
Then the shiur is inside, with pleasure. This was me. This is the shiur from 9 to 10. I was here outside.
Oh, how are you? Good. Very nice outside.
Weather permitting, right?
Actually, I wanted to tell that it was very important for me to come in person today. But in the future, I will. Monday will probably be a Zoom day, simply because I signed up for Tanya's Thursday class coming up.
Oh, Abigdal Hashem.
Button here.
Trying to get to it. Oh yeah, wait 1 second.